Today, I'd like to talk about an issue that has everything to do with methods of missions. I don't know exactly where it would fit under our divisions that we've been looking under methods. We have looked at how you get to the mission field. That was step one. And then our second study was how to evangelize. We looked at methods. Thirdly, we looked at how to disciple. That's not right, is it? It was. How to discipleize. Methods of discipleship. We discussed curriculum. We discussed preliminary steps, practical steps. Fourthly, we looked at the question of how to plant churches. Spent a couple of classes on church planting, looking at the methods of the apostles, basically tying in that to establish churches you have to discipleize. To discipleize you have to have converts, so it's a very logical progression, right? Some discipleship programs would last for a short period of time. Others would be fairly extensive. If you were trying to discipleize someone to be a church leader and groom them for church leadership, then of course that's going to be a little more involved than somebody that you're not going to see more than 2 or 3 weeks out of a year or maybe ever. All right? Now, point 5 today, which we're looking at, is the question of how do you determine with whom you can work? I'm not quite sure the best way to ask this question or even to title it. How do you determine who you will cooperate with? Whom you will cooperate with. Got to thinking about this morning. It wasn't part of my original course outline, but this is something that I'm wrestling with right now. I wrestle with it all the time. I've been raised to be very critical of people. My father is very critical of other Christians, of other Christian leaders and organizations. I've grown up with a bad taste in my mouth of it. At the same time, I realize that it's something that has to be addressed. You can't run away from it. I don't like it. I wish you didn't have to talk about it. But it always comes up. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about evangelism. 2 years ago, there was a citywide evangelistic thrust in Sault Ste. Marie. Evangelical Ministerian tried to get every church, every pastor, everybody to come into town and support this William Murray crusade. Okay? I believe the guy is, an on-fire evangelist. All right, now, big question. Is it right to cooperate with all kinds of different people in evangelism? You've got, I don't know if they had Roman Catholics. I don't think they had any Roman Catholics up there, but they had Anglicans. They had United Church, and you know what United Church is like today. They had Wesleyans. They had Baptists. They had Brethren. They had Pentecostals. They had Charismatics. They had the whole shooting match of evangelicals, quote unquote, on the rostrum. Now they didn't all do the same thing. Probably Murray is a Baptist. I don't know. That's pretty fundamental. Generally speaking, there are all different kinds of Baptists, right? But in this town, all the Baptists are pretty good. Parkland Baptist is way out on all mill doctrine. And the pastor's a real nice guy. His name's Willie Oosterman. He's a young guy. I like him. He's on fire for the Lord. He leads people to Christ. But he doesn't believe in premillennial eschatology. And he's real strong on five-point Calvinism. You don't have a free will. Nobody has a free will. Now, right, so Baptists generally pretty good. And then the brethren in this town. Bill Peterson is right. Most brethren that he knows are very liberal in practices. Now maybe he doesn't know some very good ones. Maybe there aren't any good ones around his place. I hope that we're good. But we try to be. But it's tough. It really is tough. You go to a Christian camp and they play in Christian rock. Letting the girls walking around and with nothing on. Pretty lax moral standards. Boy, what do? Right? So I'm raising a fundamental problem. This Sunday, my wife and I were down in Espanola, Bible Fellowship. Nice church, friendly people. We were entertained in a home where the girl has been for 2 summers working with Teen Missions International. I was given some literature. I got all pumped up about this. It just thrilled my heart to look and to see what was happening. These people get together in Florida for boot camp. They spend 10 days, and it's just about as bad as military boot camp. They live in tents. They get up at 5:45 every morning. They have to run an obstacle course first thing in the morning before breakfast. They run it twice a day. They have to memorize scriptures. There's no dating. There's strict personal guidelines on what they can wear. They have to wash their own dishes. If they don't wash their own dishes, they eat on them dirty. It's tough. Like it's really a tough program. And then these kids are sent out on evangelistic teams if they choose to go on an evangelistic team, or they can choose to go on a work team anywhere in the world. It costs $2,500 to go to Africa or Australia. For 4 months they go. And they go to work. And they get up at 6 o'clock on the field, and they work from 7 to 12. And then they work from 1:30 to 5:30. Like it's work. It's not playtime. And they build churches, and they dig ditches, and it was really exciting watching these videos about this program. This girl's life has been radically altered. Question: they work with all kinds of denominations. I looked at the stuff with the mission boards with whom they work, and I'm not sure yet if you can choose, if a person signs up for Teen Missions International, if they can choose where they want to go. But they've got Pentecostal and Charismatic mission boards that they work with. They've got Methodists and Wesleyan. They've got Pentecostals. They've got all different kinds of brethren. They've got independent. They've got other ones I don't even recognize. Now, where do you draw the line? If you're going to teach someone about Jesus Christ, you have to ask yourself this question. Wes DePietro, before he came to school here, he spent 6 weeks in Brazil with Campus Crusade for Christ. They were doing evangelism, film evangelism, setting up films in all different parts of the big cities and little communities, and they preached the gospel. They preached the story of Jesus. But they cooperated with all the local churches that were there. And Wes began to question, what do? Is this right? You lead a person to the Lord, and then you send them back, too, and you're required. You can't discuss divisive doctrine. That's one of the stipulations regarding Campus Crusade ministries. You cannot discuss divisive doctrine. If a person says you want to be baptized, or if you send this new Christian back in, you send him back to a Methodist church. He believes he can lose his salvation 6 weeks later. Send him back to a Pentecostal church. That's right. Is it right for me to cooperate in a venture where I'm essentially handing over a convert that I may have led to the Lord for someone else to discipleize that has got some real problems theologically? or practical. You know, do I want to encourage someone to get involved in the charismatic movement if I lead them to the Lord and then hand them over to someone else? And this is the question you have to ask yourself. How do you determine with whom you'll cooperate with and under what circumstances? Now, evangelism is one area where you see all kinds of cooperation. Team Missions International, Campus Crusade for Christ, examples. What about in discipleship? Could you have an effective discipleship ministry if you had a charismatic and a Pentecostal and a Brethren and a Liberal Baptist and an Anglican all sitting in and trying to work together, leading people to a deeper knowledge of Jesus Christ? I can't imagine how it would work. I can't imagine that. There would obviously be some fundamental areas of agreement. There's no question. So it's the question, I could ask this question that we're dealing with this morning a dozen different ways. Who shouldn't I work with? Where do you draw the line between working with people that differ from you? Essentially, should we adopt an ecumenical perspective for missions? What's wrong with ecumenism? Do you know what ecumenism is? Does the type of work you do affect the principles you adopt by which you do it? Maybe you can adopt stricter principles regarding who you will work with if you're doing a church planting ministry as opposed to mere evangelism or simple evangelism. It's a serious question. What's wrong with working with Pentecostals? As long as people are getting saved, isn't that the point? That's the way you'll hear the question. Now, basically we're talking about methodology this morning. And it's a real issue. And you need to confront it head on in this course so that you've got time to digest some of the ramifications of how you're going to respond to this kind of thing. I know exactly right now, I could tell you, and I'm not going to tell you, but I have come to a decision about the way I operate with people. I have a very clear procedure by which I personally operate. But then Amanda, she's all excited about seeing this video this weekend, and she wants to go to teen missions. This summer, they have a pre-teen thing for 10 to 12-year-olds. They go to boot camp for 10 days. They do the same thing as those older kids do. They just don't go anywhere in the other parts of the world. They work on camps and ministries in America. Do I want to expose my daughter to an ecumenical-oriented type of thing, even if it is, by and large, really healthy spiritually, where they've got strong standards morally, and I'm not going to be afraid that she's going to be falling in love with some charismatic boy. They're not allowed to do that sort of thing. Highly supervised. They keep them busy from morning to night. They don't have time to run off into the woods. Stuff like that. Okay, so it's good, but what is she going to take away from that if I let her go? How can I explain to her what I believe about it? I mean, she doesn't understand. She doesn't have a good basis for understanding. You understand? Some of the issues involved. So this morning I don't know how far we'll get in this. Maybe we should spend a couple of classes on this question. It's got to be important. It's caused me a lot of grief, and you're going to, if you're going to get into Christian work, even if you stay in the pastorate or work in a local church somewhere, even if you're in industry but you work in a local church, you're going to have to develop you're going to have to come to some decision about this question, because local churches have to deal with it.
That will want you to compromise.
Okay, you've used the word compromise. Now, what's involved in compromise? How do you recognize compromise? Where are the limits of compromise? We are not all different. We're not all the same. We're all different. Okay.
They may feel that compromising too.
what's a standard of Scripture? Are you going to accept the 5 basic fundamentals of the Fundamentalists that they've held since the 1900s in the United States and Canada? You know, the virgin birth of Christ, the absolute deity and humanity of Christ, the salvation by grace alone. You know, I can't list. Yeah, the Bible is the only infallible standard for life and conduct and teaching, and so forth. Like, there are basics. But what about the other things that people don't include? And by the way, this brings up the issue of why do you bother asking somebody for a statement of faith? Why am I asking you in this course to analyze mission agencies to discuss their doctrinal statement of faith? So what? Your answer to this question either invalidates that whole process or highlights it. So grieving the Spirit. How do you grieve the Spirit? By working with someone that doesn't believe, for example, in pre-trib rapture. Are they grieving the Spirit? Well, when isn't it an issue? That's the question.
Well, I'm from a Baptist church. He's NIV on millennial, main pastor. But then I come here and I say, oh, hallelujah. Well, and I pretty much made up my mind on it. And I'm not no wise when you say I'm compromising by having fellowship with them, because they're very God dependent on me so much. They go to the world word. But the issue is left totally alone. Deal with the issue.
Okay. That's fine, I suppose. Like, I mean, some people would disagree with this. Bill Peterson would disagree with that. He said, no, I wouldn't Baptist World Missions, pre-trib, pre-mill. Right? He would not recommend that you go with, say, Gospel Missionary Union or someplace like that, or one of these other missions. Why? Because that's a non-issue to many people. Eschatology is a non-issue.
I was sitting here thinking I could not work with, now, more so than ever, I could not work with Pentecostal charismatics because their whole thing in salvation is you got to speak in tongues. And how can I go and work with them on a team? Lead people to the Lord.
But this summer I met a Pentecostal lady in Manitowoc, a very godly woman, and her daughter is a Christian. She came to the club. There's no question that they love the Lord. If we're going to use what you raised, Steve, as the common denominator or the thing that we will accept as a basis for fellowship and cooperation in the ministry in evangelism, discipleship, or church planting, or fellowshipping.
Yeah, but there won't be contention in something like rapture. There will be contention. Well, there can be contention in both there. And as far as the Pentecostal charismatic on my end of it, what I'm saying is I've got people that I love very dearly that are in Pentecostal church. And there's no way that I would say they're any other than born again, fine Christian people. Okay, some of them actually members of family, as well as some of my best personal friends. But go out and do an evangelizing work with those people. When their emphasis is on the end on telling every single time that they're dealing with a spiritual problem. And I've watched it, and I've been with them enough years, and that's been, I've been 16, 17 years old. I've been involved with the Pentecostal church, knowing the people in there. And I would find it hard to go evangelize. I had worked on jobs for a few of them that we did a little bit of witnessing, but that was just basically telling what it's true. But it always seems to end up on their end of it, going to the charismatic, even the Pentecostal. You got to realize there are different branches of the Pentecostal. So I would find it hard to know. Go to Anglican, I couldn't work with them because I don't believe they're saved. United Church, I couldn't work with them because I don't believe they're saved. I don't believe they're scriptural. I don't believe that they're faithful in the Bible. Right on down the line, you can find it. But if my Bible isn't available, the Word of God itself, maybe some points that I'm still at a small, not a conclusive interpretation of it. So I couldn't go out and evangelize in the kingdom with that. When if I don't get controversy in amongst the same members of God, the statements I do that. Each and every one. Each and every time.
There's more to it than just the immediate ministry that you're involved in too. If I go to Manitouwadge or to Marathon or someplace and I lead a little kid to the Lord, right? And let's say I plant, because he's my convert, I have a responsibility to either direct him to a church, right? Where he's going to, if there is a church there, where he's going to get nourished and settled, rooted in the Word properly. Right? Not only do I have the responsibility to direct him to a good church for growth, fellowship, and encouragement and teaching, but I have the responsibility to plant seed thoughts in his own mind. Now, you plant seed thoughts not only by the overt statements by which you make to a person who's a new convert. Like I teach them, now that you trust in the Lord, you'll never lose your salvation. I mean, you may feel like it sometimes, but, once you're in God's family, you can never come out of God's family. You can't never be lost again. Right? Now, that's planting a seed thought. I haven't given him any scriptures. He needs teaching. He needs somebody to amplify that and come back on it several times, particularly when he feels like he's lost his salvation. That's what he needs a church for and other Christians. But I've got to plant proper seed thoughts in his mind. Well, that's fine. Now, if I was working with Campus Crusade, one of my colleagues might talk to my convert and plant a different seed thought in his mind. And it's not just the planting of a seed thought, but maybe when this kid matures and he's 16 years old and he's deciding, I should start going to church, or maybe he's drifted away from the church. Maybe I should go to church. And he's going to think back, that guy that came to my Bible club, he was a real nice guy. I really liked him. And he said he went to a charismatic church somewhere, and I wonder where I could find one of those. You're going to plant a seed of thought in a kid's mind by your own personal example, not just by what you teach them directly, the advice you give them, but by your example. So, to cooperate, for example, with an Anglican, we're leaving an impression in the minds of unsaved people. One impression that you're leaving is that, hey, these Christians can get together, they can cooperate. That's great. Well, that's not a bad impression to leave with people, But the second impression is that, maybe there's the difference between these people aren't really important. But it doesn't matter. These are some things that you have to bear in mind. Now, let's start by looking at a few things this morning. Let's define ecumenism. Let's talk about the ecumenical movement today. And I think we are going to spend a couple of days on this subject because it's such a crucial thing. And it's a tough question. The Ecumenical Movement.
Every time I see it, I'll together.
Well, the English word actually comes from the Greek word oikumene. And you should know what that means by now. Oikumene. Okay, similar to oikos. Oikumene is the Greek word for inhabited world. Ecumenic, oikumene, you can see the phonetic and audible similarities between the two words. Ecumenical, the word ecumenical means by etymology, quote, relating to people worldwide. Let me give you three definitions, and then I'll let you decide which one you want. Okay, remember the names. I'll give you Melvin Laycock's definition, Richard DeHaan's definition, and then a definition compiled from Webster's dictionary. This is Laycock's. Ecumenical is a term which is used to describe the effort to bring all churches into a visible unity in one faith and one Eucharistic fellowship. Richard DeHaan says that ecumenical is a drive, ecumenism is a drive to bring Christians together into one great organization. A compiled definition from Webster would be principles and practices as exemplified among religious groups as Christian denominations, promoting or tending toward worldwide Christian unity or cooperation. Now, which one do you want me to slow down and give to you? Pardon? Okay, well, I'll just give you Webster's. You can get definitions from many places. Here's the compiled definition. Ecumenism is, quote, principles and practices as exemplified among religious groups brackets, in brackets, as Christian denominations, promoting or tending toward worldwide Christian unity or cooperation. Now, you may want to jot down a few points about what the ecumenical movement is like. I'm not going to give you, final notes on this, I don't think, but you should jot down a few characteristics about the ecumenical movement. Richard DeHaan describes the plan of the ecumenists. He says ecumenism first calls for a merging of all Protestant bodies into one, then the uniting of Catholic and Protestants, and finally the bringing under one roof of all religions, including Buddhism, Hinduism, and the Muslims. Because this is a drive that religious people have, and they're organized under the World Council of Churches to do so.
Now, this merge of all bodies, is this referring to Christian bodies or
No,
all bodies?
all bodies, all religious groups.
Okay.
First step is to unite Protestants. Well, let's face it, the Protestants have multiplied in their divisions since the 1500s when the first Protestants came into existence in opposition to the Catholics. Actually, there have always been non-Catholic believers, the Waldensians, the Albigensians, and probably other people that we don't even know the names of, right, that never belonged to the Catholics. We're going to discuss it in a moment, right? But the threefold plan of ecumenists is first to see that the Protestants are all united. Secondly, to unite the Protestants and the Catholics. That will heal the original rift back in the Reformation. And then to bring in to the united Christendom the non-Christian religions. And that's the drive that has been in operation since 1948. There has been official plans to achieve these three goals. To bring in non-Christian religions into this unity. A little bit of history. Mel Laycock tells us that in 1948 the World Council of Churches, and WCC should be an adequate short form for that, the World Council of Churches began with 147 denominations. That's right after World War II. There was a real drive to get people together. This war, this fighting is too much. Let's get together. Today, the World Council of Churches has grown to include approximately 300 denominations representing some 400 million people. The World Council of Churches, while admitting that the ecumenical movement is broader than its own institution, claims with ample justification that it is, quote, the most nearly comprehensive instrument of the ecumenical movement in the world today. Now, this was written back in 1981, 8 years ago, right? I was watching the news last night. The Anglican Archbishop in this area just died over the weekend. I forget his name. Famous man here in the Sioux area. Came from Ottawa, and he's been here for many years. And he was an important person in the World Council of Churches. He was also a Mason, high order Mason. This guy, lauded by all the denominations in Sioux City. Just about the only people that don't belong to the World Council of Churches as an umbrella organization in this town are the Baptists and the Brethren, and some independent churches. But just about all denominations belong to the World Council of Churches. I don't know. See, what happens is you can be an official member of the World Council of Churches, and then you can have observer status, where you just send representatives to just keep an eye on what's happening for news and stuff. Well, the Catholics have been observers for many years. In fact, I don't know, they may have just joined.
The observers, they're probably organized the whole thing.
Okay. Let me give you a little bit more here. How many of you have you ever heard of the World Council of Churches before? Over 300 denominations in 1981. 400 million Christians. Well, Christians in the general sense. Okay. Ecumenism, according to Meyer, is a phenomenon which is not confined to the 20th century. Lutherans, it goes back to the very origins of Protestantism. The Lutherans attempted to try to unite Catholics and Calvinists and Lutherans in the years after the split. The Moravians hoped to bring about unity of all Christian churches in the 1800s. In 1910, the ecumenical movement, the modern ecumenical movement, had its impetus in Scotland in a meeting called the World Missions Conference in 1910. That's historically the date that this stuff began. It created two groups called the Faith and Order Movement and the Life and Work Movement, and those two groups joined together in 1948 in Amsterdam to form the World Council of Churches. In the United States, you've got the Federal Council of Churches of Christ and the National Council of Churches of Christ in 1950. Did you know that the Eastern Orthodox, that is the Greek Orthodox Church, and the Roman Catholic Church were officially reunited in 1965? You probably didn't even know they were split. But originally they were one church, and in 1056 or 1059. The Catholics, anyway, and the western arm of the Christian church and the eastern arm of the church split over leadership and politics and power and all that kind of stuff. They've been corrupt for years and years. And so the Roman Catholics are fully involved in the ecumenical movement today. Let's talk about some of their theology. When you talk about the World Council of Churches and the ecumenical movement, this is what they believe. According to DeHaan, he says they have a new theology. The leaders of the Ecumenical Movement look upon the Bible as a fallible book. They deny the Trinity. They repudiate the doctrine of the virgin birth. They deny the substitutionary nature of Christ's death, the reality of his physical resurrection. They do not view man as a guilty sinner. They deny that man's only hope for salvation is to be found in Jesus Christ. Just put down that they deny every fundamental doctrine. Right? They just deny every fundamental doctrine, including bibliology, theology proper, Christology, anthropology, eschatology, hamartiology. They deny all what we would believe in all as fundamental to all of those doctrines. Billy Graham, in his methods, I've heard, will not go and put on a. Billy Graham will not put on a crusade unless all the churches, unless the majority of churches, a certain percentage of the churches in that particular area in which the crusade is hosted, will agree to cooperate in it. He's been ecumenical for years.
He's going to give you that Catholic first.
The ecumenists utilize the latest methods of psychology in an attempt to rid people of guilt complexes and to assure them that they do not need to fear a day of judgment and eternal condemnation. Some ecumenists speak of Christ's cross, his resurrection, and salvation, but they use the words only as connotation terms. In other words, they redefine biblical terms. Right? That's a key point. They will use biblical terminology and they attach unbiblical definitions to them. I have no idea, dear. This is not the time to discuss it.
Oops.
That was for my soup.
Oh.
We were just rudely interrupted, Ken. The cook is hopping mad because the boys stole the ham out of the fridge.
Boy.
And it was supposed, the boy, namely Blair, ate the ham and it was supposed to go in the soup for lunch. Back to reality. Ecumenists deceitfully use the biblical words to express thoughts completely at variance with the teachings of the Scriptures. Mel Laycock says, after stating the doctrinal position of the ecumenists, that the Council's doctrinal publication states, 2 paragraphs later, that, quote, since the World Council of Churches is not itself a church, it passes no judgment upon the sincerity with which member churches accept the basis. In other words, all these people have to sign a doctrinal statement to join the World Council of Churches. But because the World Council of Churches is quote unquote not a church, it will not sit and discipline upon a member that signs knowing full well that doesn't believe anything that's on the doctrinal statement. The World Council of Churches says ecumenism exists by holding contradictions together, unquote. Noel Smith says of the World Council of Churches that they make the written word of God conform to the contemporary philosophy, religion, and politics. They do it by spiritualizing what they don't like. They do it by divorcing words from reality. Regarding the mission of the church, the World Council of Churches and ecumenists insist that Christians should not be occupied with preaching a message of individual salvation from sin, but with solving the social problems of our day. In other words, feed the hungry and build churches and put in water systems. Never mind individual spiritual salvation. Save their bodies and their societies. The WCC says that the church should perform the psychological function of assuring people that sin and guilt feelings are more figments of the imagination. They contend that preachers are to assume the role of sociologists by arousing men and women, and especially young people, to social action against injustices and inequities. And therefore the World Council of Churches espouses revolution. It is considered by the World Council of Churches to be the means whereby the total structure of society can be changed. This liberation theology seeks to remove liberation theology. Put it down. That's their basic method of missions. Liberation theology. Take up guns to kill the despots so that you can have peace in the country. Liberation theology seeks to remove the conflict between man and to eliminate racism. Revolution is the instrument whereby this is accomplished. In 1970, the World Council of Churches aided 19 liberation movements and guerrilla movements and terrorists. In 1972, they campaigned to support the American draft dodgers and deserters to the tune of $210,000. That's what donations from Christian churches around the world was spent to help American draft dodgers. $3 million was given to radical groups around the world. The goals of the ecumenical movement are stated. Quote, the whole ecumenical drive is wrongly motivated and strives for goals contrary to the Word of God, according to DeHaan. The end, according to Noel Smith, is stated as being unity, harmony, peace, and security. Melvin Laycock said the original goal of the ecumenical movement and the council was, quote, the unity of the churches. The new vision of the World Council of Churches is for the unity of all religions and, in fact, all mankind. People don't realize it, but for example, Lutheran churches, all the different kinds of Lutherans that I know of belong to the World Council of Churches. That means that a certain percentage of their financial income is donated to the World Council of Churches umbrella organization. That organization, therefore, sends money to its particular projects. Their projects what kind of projects they do is determined by what they believe. They believe that there's nothing wrong with revolution because that breaks down racism and injustice. And so therefore a certain amount of World Council of Churches funds is donated towards communist movements, terrorist organizations, and that money comes from Christians. And that very thing is happening today, and that's why a lot of people have pulled out of the World Council of Churches and the National Council of Churches, which is basically the same thing, the Federal Council of Churches, and a lot of these, UNICEF, for example. You know, you see their ads on, this is not a religious organization. What does it stand for? I forget what it stands for, but a few years ago they had little boxes, trick or treat for UNICEF. They're collecting money at Halloween time. This organization supports revolutionary communist groups.
Unless you go around collecting $1.
That's right. Now, they also do good things in this country too. You know, they support blind people and R&D for cancer and diabetes and all the other problems, right? But they are supported by member organizations, member groups that have these radical views, and therefore they have to do what they want them to do. Well, I guess we'll pick up with this next class. That's a description of the World Council of Churches and the basic. These are the organized people in the so-called ecumenical movement today. Their ideas have rubbed off on Christians everywhere, even the ones that don't belong to the organization.